The boom rattled their teeth before the pressure wave even hit. Jim didn't look up from the tin of stew he was stirring. Jane, across the cramped galley table, shifted her chair just enough so the panel of emergency lights above her wouldn't shine directly in her eyes. Neither spoke. Out here on the Vecker's fringe, you didn't jump at every sound. If it was fatal, you'd know soon enough. Another detonation, closer this time, made the metal under their boots groan. Jane set down her cup. "Guess that's not meteors," she murmured, her voice flat, almost bored. Jim finally raised his eyes, slow and deliberate. Nope. They had been married long enough that whole conversations could ride in a single glance. She saw the tiny twitch at the corner of his mouth, wry humor, but also the calculation flickering behind his steady gaze. He saw the way her hand slid under the table, loosening the holster strap without looking down. The door to the listening post's galley banged open. A stink of ammonia and iron spilled in before the figures followed. 7 Rithkar warriors, armor clacking, chittering in their language. Insectoid, jointed limbs moving with unnatural speed, they filled the space in seconds. Heavy rifles angled like spears. Their leader's mandibles clicked twice before a translator unit on his chest squawked out, "Humans, you will kneel." Jim set down the ladle. "You gentlemen hungry? We've got stew. Bit salty, but it'll keep you standing." The leader tilted his head as if trying to parse whether that was defiance. Jane had not moved except to sip her cooling tea. The Rithkar weren't used to prey that stayed seated. "You are prisoners," the translator rasped. "You will submit." Jane's tone was mild. "You came all this way without calling ahead. The least we can do is offer you supper." 2 of the soldiers shifted uneasily. Jim noted it. They weren't fresh recruits. They'd seen combat, which made their discomfort more telling. These weren't troops accustomed to an enemy that treated an invasion like a social call. The leader gestured sharply. One warrior moved toward Jane. His clawed feet made a grating scrape on the deck plating. Jim leaned back, folding his hands behind his head, the picture of lazy ease. "Careful," he said. "She bites." The alien's hand was reaching for Jane's shoulder when she moved. No flourish, no wasted motion, just a sharp twist and a flash of steel from the belt knife she'd drawn under the table. The blade slid into the seam between neck plates. The warrior made a strangled click and collapsed, limbs jerking. Before the others processed the fall, Jim was moving. Not fast, just inevitable. He stepped past the table, caught the nearest rifle barrel, and used its owner as a shield while the rest tried to fire. Plasma bolts punched through carapace instead. Jim slammed the shield alien into another, the crash echoing like a dropped anvil. Jane was already behind their leader, the tip of her knife resting between his upper plates. "That translator's handy," she said softly, "but I'm guessing it doesn't carry distress signals?" "Release him," one of the remaining soldiers hissed, mandibles clacking. Jim grinned. "Sure. After you clean up the mess you've made on my floor." It took less than 30 seconds. 7 entered. None walked out. The air was thick with the metallic tang of alien blood. Jane wiped her blade on a rag, not looking at the bodies. 14 each now, she said, checking her wrist display. "Still a tie," Jim replied. They worked in silence for a moment, dragging the corpses toward the airlock. Neither asked the obvious question. Why the Rithkar were here? Why now? On the fringe, you didn't ask until you had to. Jane sealed the last of the bodies in an ejection pod. Jim keyed the release, sending the dead spinning into the void. Somewhere in the black, the Rithkar fleet would pick up their comrades' drifting remains. The message would be read one way. Humans had fought back. "I saw one run," Jane said. Jim nodded. "Good. Let him tell the story." The boom that had started it all felt distant now, like a half-forgotten prelude. But Jim knew better. In war, silence was rarely the end. It was just a breath before the next blow. Jane leaned on the edge of the console, eyes on the cold shimmer of stars beyond the viewport. "You think they'll send more?" "They will," Jim said. "And they'll think they're ready this time." She glanced at him sidelong. "And we'll be ready?" His smile didn't reach his eyes. "We've been ready since Montana. For a heartbeat, the memory rose. Snowfield maneuvers, a different enemy. The same ruthless rhythm between them. She had been the one to spot the flank, he had been the one to set the trap, and the kill count had been even then too. Somewhere deep in the outpost's comms grid, a signal pinged. Unknown source. Unknown encryption. Jane straightened. That's not ours. Jim toggled the channel. The voice that emerged was a blend of static and something like laughter. Your location is known. Reinforcements dispatched. Capture orders active. Jim shut it off before it finished. The hum of the galley's broken light fixture filled the quiet. Capture, Jane repeated. Not kill. They want to see what makes us tick. He slid his rifle from its mount, checking the charge. They'll regret it. She tied her hair back with a scrap of cloth, a ritual as much as preparation. Tie's still on though, she said, almost smiling. He met her eyes, and the shared look was heavier than any jest. It was the same understanding that had carried them through 7 years of firefights, sabotage runs, and the long black between stations. Whatever came next, they would face it together, and God help whoever stood in the way. Outside, beyond the thin shell of the listening post, distant engine flares bloomed against the stars. Jane's voice was calm, almost gentle. Looks like story time's over, Jim. He flicked the safety off. No love. Story's just getting good. The Rithkar fleet did not mourn, but it remembered. In the flagship's War Council chamber, under the fractured glow of a dozen suns projected on the walls, commanders listened to the single survivor's account of the humans. His voice was thin, his chittering uneven, as if every word threatened to collapse into panic. He spoke of a male and a female, unarmored, underarmed, yet lethal in a way that made no tactical sense. He described their calm faces, the small jokes exchanged while cutting down his squad. He did not embellish. He did not need to. The younger officers laughed, clattering mandibles in disbelief. But one figure, a Gurith strategist with a thick ridge of scar tissue over his left eye, leaned forward, saying only, "You are not prepared for them." His warning fell into the void between ranks. The Rithkar commander waved a limb in dismissal and ordered a proper force sent to put down the mammals. 50 soldiers, enough in their estimation to capture the pair without bloodshed. Back on the Vekaris fringe, Jim and Jane had already turned the listening post into something else entirely. The mess hall was stripped bare, the storage bays emptied of their orderly rows. Every vent, every corridor, every pressure door now held purpose. Fuel cells were rigged with proximity triggers. Tripwires strung from nearly invisible monofilament crisscrossed the service tunnels. Even the battered crate of canned peaches, long past expiration, was wired to detonate if disturbed. Jane crouched over an open floor panel, soldering leads with a steady hand. "You want the charge delay on this one?" "Half a second," Jim said, without looking up from a rifle he was cleaning. "Long enough for them to think they've stepped over it before it cooks them." "Romantic," she murmured. He glanced at her, a faint smile tugging at his mouth. "You know how I get when company's coming." When the dropships arrived, they came in formation, a black rain of armored hulls blotting the stars. The ground shook as they touched down, talons digging into the regolith. The outpost sensors lit up with movement, 50 life forms advancing in disciplined lines. From a concealed viewport, Jim watched them fan out. "They're expecting us to run," he said. Jane, beside him, adjusted the sight on her carbine. "Then we'd better disappoint them." The first alien breached the outer airlock and took one step into the corridor. The tripwire caught his foot. The fuel cell detonated with a blossom of blue-white flame that lit the hallway like a forge. Shrapnel tore into the next 3 behind him, their armor folding inward like paper. Over the comms, alien voices barked commands, ordering units to spread out. That only funneled them deeper into the trap. The canned peaches exploded in a compressed roar, taking out another cluster. Jane picked off stragglers from a shadowed corner, her shots quiet and precise. In the chaos, she still found time for commentary. "These armor seams are ridiculous. Who designs plates that don't overlap?" "Probably the same genius who trained them to walk in a straight line," Jim replied. shoving a stunned alien into one of the floor traps and stepping back as the panel collapsed into a spike pit. The kill count mounted, 5, 10, 17 each. At 19 apiece, Jane shot a glance at Jim. "You're slowing down." "Just pacing myself," he said, hauling a wounded alien upright and using him as a shield until another's wild shot burned through both. By the time the surviving Rithkar regrouped, the neat assault formation was gone. Their voices were tighter now, edges frayed by confusion. The report going back to their command would carry a different tone than the last. These humans were coordinated beyond any battlefield pairing the aliens knew. They moved without verbal cues, anticipated each other's needs as if reading the same script. In the brief lull after the last of the second wave fell, Jim leaned against the wall, catching his breath. Jane checked the ammo reserves with clinical calm. 8 left, she said. 8's enough, he answered. They didn't need to ask each other the real question. How many more would come? The alien retreat was a feint, and they both knew it. The Rithkar didn't abandon objectives. They recalculated. Somewhere above, a commander was deciding whether to send the next force to destroy them or to take them alive. In the flagship's war council, the Gurut strategist spoke again, his voice a low growl that cut through the static. They fight like a pack. There is no hierarchy between them. You do not have a word for what they are. What they are, the Rithkar commander said, are tired prey. We will break them. The strategist did not smile. If they are prey, why are you the ones bleeding? On the ground, Jane and Jim reset their traps. The air inside the outpost thick with the acrid tang of burned circuitry and alien ichor. They didn't speak much now. The jokes still flickered, but the space between them carried a sharper charge. Jane paused at a corridor junction, listening to the faint hum of the emergency lights. "They'll send a bigger net," she said quietly. Jim adjusted the strap of his rifle. "Let them. We'll just cut it." The next wave didn't come in silence. They announced themselves with sonic pulses designed to disorient mammalian prey. The sound clawed at the edges of hearing, a vibration more felt than heard. Jim and Jane moved through it like it was background music, planting their final explosives and taking high ground in the central atrium. The aliens surged in, faster this time, less cautious. Jim's first shot took out the leader. Jane's grenade bounced twice before vanishing under the legs of a tight cluster. The explosion painted the walls in dull green. Still, the Rithkar kept coming. For every one that fell, 2 more pushed forward. The humans fell back, step by step, drawing them deeper into the atrium's kill zone. When the last alien crossed the threshold, Jane hit the detonator. Every charge they'd set, fuel cells, pressure mines, rig vents, went off in a rolling chain of thunder that tore the atrium apart. Silence followed, the kind that rings in the bones. Smoke curled through broken beams. Jim coughed once, brushing soot from his cheek. 42, Jane said. He shook his head. 43. I took the leader. She tilted her head in mock accusation, but the smirk faded as movement stirred in the wreckage. Not Rithkar. Something else. A drone, sleek and black, rising from beneath the debris. It hovered for a moment, scanning them with a cold blue eye. Then it projected an image into the air, a map of the sector, with a listening post at its center and dozens, no hundreds, of red markers converging. The drone's voice was not mechanical, but chillingly calm. By order of the Rithkar High Command, you are to be taken alive. Surrender, and you will not be harmed. Jane exchanged a glance with Jim. There was no surprise in her eyes, only a tightening focus. Jim stepped forward, addressing the drone directly. Tell your High Command dinner's on us. The drone hovered for a moment longer, recording his face, then shot upward through the atrium's ruined roof and vanished into the night sky. Jane exhaled slowly. Alive, huh? Yeah, Jim said, already moving toward the weapons rack. That's the part they're going to regret. The Rithkar didn't storm the listening post this time. They surrounded it. Dropships like black fangs bit into the regolith, sealing every exit. Drones buzzed in synchronized orbits overhead, each one a lid on the cage. Jim and Jane didn't run. They stood at the shattered atrium window, and watched the lines form. The aliens moved with careful, deliberate coordination. No more overconfident charges, no more straight-line formations. "They've learned," Jane murmured. Jim's mouth curved faintly. "They think they have." The first voice came over the comm, rich with static and authority. "Humans, you are surrounded. Lay down your weapons and step outside. You will not be harmed." Jane arched her brow. "That's sweet of them." Jim keyed the mic. "We appreciate the invitation. Got room service." There was a pause, just long enough for the translator algorithms to churn through sarcasm. "You will comply." They complied. Calmly, slowly, rifle slung, hands visible, boots crunching over debris as they stepped into the open. A circle of armored Rithkar closed in, weapons trained but not firing. The cold air carried the faint tang of ozone from the drone's energy fields. One soldier, broader than the rest, shackled Jim's wrists with a hiss of magnetic locks. Another did the same to Jane. She tested the weight, not the strength. Metal was metal, and metal broke. As they were marched to the central dropship, Jane glanced sidelong at him. "I give it for minutes before they regret this." 3, he murmured back. Inside, the ship was all harsh lighting and antiseptic metal. The air stank faintly of oil and alien musk. They were seated opposite each other, restraints bolted to the floor. 2 guards stood in the corner, mandibles clacking in low conversation. Jim leaned back as far as the cuffs allowed. "Well, this is cozy. We should have them over for Christmas." One guard twitched at the unfamiliar word, but said nothing. When they docked with the flagship, it was seamless. No jolt, no fanfare. The kind of precision you expected from a species that prided itself on order. They were escorted down a corridor lined with black glass panels. Behind each panel, shadows moved, observers studying the new specimens. Jane tilted her head as they walked, taking in door placements, vent sizes, panel seams. The rhythm of her gaze was casual, but Jim recognized it as counting heartbeats in her head. The interrogation chamber was a sphere of light. The walls glowed with a cold white that flattened all shadows. In the center, 2 chairs waited. Their escorts placed Jim in one, Jane in the other, and locked them in with a soft click. Across from them, a Rithkar officer stepped forward. His armor was black and gold, the kind that spoke of rank as much as protection. The translator on his chest hummed, "You are dangerous, yet you smile. Explain." Jim's voice was even. "Politeness costs nothing." "You killed 63 of my soldiers," the officer said. Jane corrected him. 64. The leader in the atrium. The officer's mandibles clicked once, sharply. "You will tell us everything you know about human combat methods." Jim's gaze didn't waver. "Sure. But first, we'll need tea. And perhaps a snack. Can't strategize on an empty stomach." The officer blinked, as if parsing whether this was mockery. "You are in no position to bargain." "Not bargaining," Jim said. "Being polite." The questioning began in earnest, tactical queries, requests for unit compositions, weapon designs. Jim and Jane answered with deliberate banality. Jane described kitchen knives. Jim explained the importance of a well-timed insult. When asked about battlefield coordination, Jane smiled faintly and said, "It's like dancing. If you have to count the steps, you've already lost." Hours passed. The aliens left to confer. The lights dimmed slightly, the hum of the ship deepening. Alone, Jane leaned forward until her restraints pulled taut. "They don't realize," she said softly. "This is what we wanted." Jim's eyes met hers, and they brought us straight to the heart. The plan had been seeded months ago. Intel leaks, false trails, deliberate provocations. The listening post was never just a listening post. It was bait. The kill count was a side effect. The real objective had always been to get aboard the flagship. Their guards returned, flanking the black and gold officer. "You will be transferred to containment," he said, "for further study." As they were led through the ship, Jim began to hum, a slow, low melody that didn't belong to any alien scale. Jane joined in on the second verse, her voice steady. The guards shifted uneasily, not understanding the words, but sensing their weight. American folk song, Jim said mildly when one demanded an explanation. About wolves. Containment was colder, darker. The walls here were dull metal, the air stale. Their cell had no furniture, only a single recessed light. The door sealed with a hiss. For a while, they were silent. Then Jane spoke. Deck count from docking bay to here? 4, Jim said. 2 lifts, 1 main spine corridor, 6 guard posts. Vent access. Halfway back on the second deck. Too small for them. Just right for us. They slept in shifts, counting patrol times by the rhythm of boots outside. By the 3rd cycle, they had the schedule memorized. By the 4th, they had the key patterns of a locking mechanism cataloged from the faint click each time it cycled. On the 5th, Jim said, "Tonight." Jane nodded once. When the door opened for the scheduled guard check, they moved. Jane slammed the first guard into the wall, cutting off a shout. Jim caught the second in a chokehold, twisting until the body went limp. They stripped the armor, left the corpses tucked into the shadows, and stepped into the corridor wearing the enemy skin. Moving through the flagship was like swimming through a living thing, pulsing energy conduits underfoot, the hum of power cores resonating in the bones. Every turn was calculated, every glance shared. They avoided cameras by hugging blind spots, bypassed patrols with a timing born of too many years in the field together. The command deck was ahead, 2 bulkheads and a single security post away. Jane's hand brushed Jim's as they paused in the alcove before the final stretch. Her voice was almost a whisper. After this, dinner. Somewhere with real wine. Jim's mouth twitched. Deal. They stepped into the open. The guards at the post reacted instantly, weapons half-raised. Jim's borrowed helmet tilted in an approximation of casual authority. Transfer orders from containment, he said in perfect mimicry of the Rithkar's clicking cadence. It bought them 3 steps. That was all they needed. Jane's blade was in the first guard's throat before the second understood. Jim took the other with a palm strike that shattered chitin. The bulkhead controls were alien, but logic was logic. Jim's hands flew over them, cycling the lock. The doors parted, spilling them into the heart of the flagship. The bridge was vast, all sweeping arcs and starfield views. Officers turned in alarm, their voices tangling into a chorus of sharp clicks. Jane's carbine was already up, cutting down the nearest before they could reach the alarm. Jim crossed to the central console, fingers dancing over controls as if the alien language had been his first. "What are you doing?" an officer demanded, his translator spitting the words into the charged air. Jim looked up at him with a calm so deep it was almost kindness. "Setting the table." Outside, in the infinite black, the faint glint of incoming human ships began to pierce the starfield. Stars drifted like frozen embers beyond the panoramic curve of the flagship's bridge. The alien officers had gone from shouting orders to falling utterly silent, their dark eyes fixed on the calm figure of a human man standing at the central console, as if it were his own kitchen counter. Jim's hands moved with unhurried precision, tapping in strings of commands that were never meant for human fingers to know. Jane stood beside him, carbine steady, her gaze sweeping the room. The air hummed with the quiet, animal fear that comes when a predator enters the den, and you suddenly understand who it belongs to. The black and gold Rithkar commander forced his voice to work. "You will stop. Now." Jim didn't look up. "I'm afraid we've reached the point in the evening where polite conversation runs out." A junior officer lunged for an alarm panel. Jane's shot took him in the joint, dropping him without breaking her rhythm. She didn't glance at him. She didn't need to. Their unspoken split of the work was as natural as breath. Jim dismantled the ship's mind. Jane kept its body from moving. The bridge crew's mandibles clicked in mounting panic as alien glyphs rolled across the display in front of Jim. It was a flagship's neural command lattice. Every connected ship in the Rithkar armada mirrored here. Every vulnerability laid bare. "You think you're clever," the commander spat, his translator lagging just enough to give each word a strange echo. Jim finally raised his eyes. "No. Clever gets you invited to conferences. This is something else." He tapped one last key. Across the viewport, space began to ripple, not with weapon fire, but with the cold, coordinated arrival of the human fleet. No grand flares of engines, no theatrical war drums. They came in like shadows leaning forward. Sleek destroyers, carrier hulks, and smaller ships bristling with weapons slid into position in perfect, silent formation. On the bridge, the air shifted. It was the soundless vacuum thunder of every alien present realizing that their own fleet was now trapped between the teeth of something patient. Jane tilted her head toward the viewport. "Looks like we made good time." Jim nodded slightly. Always better to be early for dinner. The human fleet's comm signal cut through the bridge speakers. Low, steady, formal. "Execute extinction protocol." A murmur of horror rolled through the Rithkar officers. The phrase meant nothing in their tongue, but their translators rendered the human words without losing their finality. The commander tried for authority. "We will fight to the last vessel." "No," Jim said mildly, "you won't." Jane's fingers moved over a secondary panel, feeding targeting data directly to the fleet. Each coordinate represented not just a ship, but a weak point the humans had studied for years. "Do you know why we keep a kill count?" Jim asked, his voice low, almost conversational. "It's not to measure the dead. It's to remind ourselves we're not done yet." The first human salvo hit, without warning. No prelude, no countdown, just instant annihilation. Rithkar ships that had spent decades as untouchable symbols of dominance folded in on themselves, ruptured by precision strikes. The bridge shook, but not from incoming fire. Jane had locked the flagship's own weapon systems into a feedback loop, forcing them to target allies instead of enemies. On the viewport, 2 destroyers turned their cannons on their own carrier, shredding it in seconds. The Gurith strategist appeared on the secondary comm feed, his massive face heavy with something close to resignation. "I told you," he rumbled to the commander, "humans are not prey." Jim's mouth curved, but the smile carried no warmth. "You're one of the few who listen. Remember that." The commander lunged forward, mandibles flaring, but Jane's shot hit the deck at his feet, halting him mid-step. "Stay," she said softly. Like speaking to a dangerous dog she knew she could break. All around them, the Rithkar bridge crew seemed frozen between instinct and paralysis. Every console chirped warnings. Every screen showed red. Out there in the starfield, alien ships died one by one, their lights winking out like candles under a slow, patient wind. "Why?" one officer blurted, his voice pitched higher than his kind ever used in command. "Why such destruction? You could have taken prisoners. Negotiated." Jim's gaze was steady. "Because you came for us in our home, thinking we'd kneel. Because you thought we'd be too small to matter. And because the fastest way to make sure you never try again is to end the trying." Jane didn't look at the officer when she added, "You counted on us wanting to survive. You forgot we're willing to win instead." Another impact rocked the bridge. A support strut split with a groan, showering sparks. The commander's composure finally cracked. His mandibles clicked in frantic commands to his crew. None obeyed. They weren't ignoring him. They were watching the humans, waiting to see if they'd live another minute based on the subtle tilt of Jim's head or the line of Jane's shoulders. Jim keyed the internal comm to all Rithkar crews still breathing. "Drop weapons, seal yourselves in survival pods, and you will be left alone. Remain on the bridge, and you'll go down with it." The translator relayed it perfectly, and within seconds the quiet shuffle of departure began. A handful of officers bolted for the doors. Others sat stiff in their chairs. Whether out of pride or paralysis, no one could say. Jane kept her eyes on the viewport. Main battery coming about on the dreadnought cluster. "Fire," Jim said. The flagship's guns roared to life, their recoil shuddering through the deck. Alien rounds meant for human ships now tore through the heart of the Rithkar formation. 2 dreadnoughts broke apart in slow, tumbling agony, scattering debris into the paths of their fleeing escorts. Jane's voice stayed calm, measured. "Kill count's off the chart now." "Good," Jim said. "We're done keeping score." Through the chaos, the Gurith strategist remained on the comm feed, his heavy brow shadowed. "You've made your point. Jim met his gaze across the cold gulf of light years. No, we've ended the conversation. The human fleet tightened its formation, encircling what remained of the Rithkar. Jane fed in the last set of coordinates: munitions depots, fuel tankers, command relays. Each target was marked not just for destruction, but for erasure. No records, no black boxes. When it was done, it would be as though those ships had never existed. One by one, the Rithkar signals winked out. The starfield grew emptier, darker. The flagship trembled under its own death sentence. Jane turned to Jim. Time to go. They moved together without looking back, slipping from the bridge into the dim corridors beyond. The sound of distant detonations followed them, muffled by bulkheads, but still with that steady, measured rhythm, like a clock counting down. They reached the lift to the docking bay. Inside, the air felt thicker, warmer, carrying the scent of ionized metal and something older, something primal. The smell of fear in a species that had thought itself unassailable. You ever think about what we look like to them? Jane asked as the lift dropped. Jim glanced at her. Every time. And I hope it's the last thing they see before they decide never to cross us again. The docking bay was chaos. Pods firing, crews scattering. The towering frame of the flagship's spine shuddering under internal collapse. Their assigned guard ship waited with ramped down, human marines at its base. One of them called out, "Sir, ma'am, fleet command reports all objectives cleared." Orders. Jim didn't slow. Pull back to perimeter. Leave the wreckage for the historians. They boarded. The ramp sealed. The ship lifted away just as the flagship's core went critical. Through the rear viewport, the alien vessel tore itself apart, a bloom of fire and debris that spun silently into the void. Jane exhaled, long and slow. So that's it, then. Jim shook his head. That's the beginning. They'll talk about this. They'll tell their hatchlings bedtime stories about the polite predators who smiled while they tore the sky apart. The human fleet reformed around them, each ship slotting into place as though the battle had been nothing more than a well-rehearsed drill. Ahead lay the dark stretch of space between this graveyard and the next war. In the quiet of the cabin, Jane leaned back in her seat, eyes half closed. Next time, somewhere warm, with wine. Jim allowed himself the smallest of smiles. Next time, on the comm screen, a final message from the Gurith strategist flickered in. "You've taught them fear," he said, "but you've taught me respect. If we meet again, it will be as allies." Jim nodded once. "Then you're already halfway human." The screen went dark. The stars outside seemed sharper now, closer somehow. The human fleet turned as one, engines flaring. Behind them, the remains of the Rithkar Empire drifted in silence, its extinction written in cold light. Jane watched until the last ember faded. Kill count's infinite now. Jim didn't answer. He was already thinking about the next hunt.